I have in front of me an article that talks about the so-called Golden Shield project, which apparently employs more than 50,000 people to try to create these blockages of internet access in China.
Yes. I think from the beginning of this year, something's changing a little bit. Before that, the government would just use censorship to block website. But this year, they started to round up some bloggers online. Recently, a well-known artist Ai Weiwei, who is also a blogger who has more than 70,000 followers on Twitter, he was detained. And before him, there was another well-known blogger in southwestern Sichuan province was also arrested for inciting subversion of state power. So the government, I think, decided to act.
So the problems are legal, technical. There seems to be no end to how governments try to block the media. Before we continue this discussion, I want to remind our listeners that you can view or listen to this program again by downloading our podcasts at globaljournalist.org, and that includes our online discussions and features that continue over the half-hour show. You can send us questions or comments, care of Global Journalist program at gmail.com, or simply look us up on Facebook. Let me double back here to the Latin American situation. Gabriela Vivanco, you have been a vice president of the Inter-American Press Association. Is the situation in Ecuador typical of some of the other things that are happening in Latin America right now, or is this merely an aberration?
Well, I think that it's typical of certain countries and of certain governments, especially those whose presidents follow the lines of President Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. You see that the worst case, well, of course, very similar to China, is Cuba, in which there is absolutely no freedom of expression and no freedom of the press, which, it has been going on for more than 50 years. You'll only have 3% of population who actually can access the internet. So that's it's a different case, which is unique in Latin America. But then
our viewers, by the way, now are looking at a clip from Allo Presidente, Mr. Chavez's very own TV show.
Well, he has his very own TV show, and he actually controls a lot of the TV channels. He has closed 34 radio stations in the past 3 years, and the major independent news channel, and he is attacking a lot of other independent media. So you have Venezuela leading the trend in that direction, and then you have countries like Ecuador, who is following. You have Nicaragua, in which you also see a big concentration of government-owned media. You see Argentina. It's not as bad as the situation in Ecuador, but you see a lot of attempts to control the two main independent newspapers, which are La Nación, which is more than 100 years old, and Grupo Clarín, which has the largest circulating newspaper in the country. And so you have that trend. And on the other side, you also have a special case, which is Mexico, and then in a smaller way, Colombia, in which it's not the government that is actually controlling the media, but you see a lot of self-censorship in newsrooms and in independent and private-owned media because of organized crime. And lately, I actually attended the Inter-American Press Association meeting in San Diego last week. And what we see in Mexico is what we saw in Colombia in the 80s, is the fact that there is so much corruption within the government that the government itself is unable to protect journalists and to protect the media from the violence that goes on with organized crime. So you have the same consequence in all these countries that follow Chavez, Ecuador, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Argentina, in a smaller measure some Central American countries, and in Mexico, in Mexico, which is self-censorship in the newsroom. So
it seems as
pretty
if
much the consequence.
it seems. Sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to ask Barbara here if it seems as if governments are more comfortable owning the press than dealing with the press. Is this a familiar pattern that you see in Europe, Barbara?
I think in Europe maybe the situation is slightly different. We have a tradition of public broadcasters in this part of the world, which is working very well in some countries. You have fantastic broadcasters like the BBC, or even the German public broadcaster, are able to retain some level of independence while serving actually public purpose. In many other countries, however, in Europe, all over Europe, including Italy, governments seek to control those public broadcasters, and in some countries they're even directly owned by the state. Most of the Eastern European countries have yet to transform their state broadcaster into public broadcasters. So this is a common pattern in Europe, and it is certainly a problem.
Mm-hmm. Oren Kessler, the media picture is obviously changing in your region as a result of these revolutions. Where do you see that staying as basically state-owned, at least broadcast media?
There's, I think the newspaper that best exemplified the process that the media in the Middle East is going through is Al-Ahram in Egypt. It's the oldest
we've
paper
all
in the
heard
Arab world.
about
It's
Al-Ahram,
extremely
yes.
influential. It's read far beyond Egypt's borders, and it's state-run. It was for years. It was sort of the mouthpiece of the Mubarak regime. And really, almost until the end, until now deposed President Hosni Mubarak was ousted, they were really just sort of trumpeting the government line. And then almost overnight, a day after Mubarak left Cairo, they ran a lead headline saying the people have brought down the regime, which is a sort of slogan that's been chanted all over the Arab world. And there was a story in The Economist, an article that asked whether this was indicative of opportunism or a sign of newfound journalistic freedom, and its conclusion was that it's a bit of both, and I think that's probably accurate.
Mm-hmm. The situation in Israel. Tell us a little bit about that, and I know that it's sometimes difficult for journalists to get along with the Israeli government.
In Israel's got, relative to the other countries in the Middle East, Israel has got a free press. It was until 2009, it was ranked very highly by organizations like Reporters Without Borders, Freedom House. It was listed as a free country for the media. In 2009, with the Gaza offensive, that really seemed to change. Israel's ranking nosedived, largely because the government kept almost all foreign media outside of Gaza during the offensive, and a number of journalists who did make it in were injured or killed. So now it's listed by those same organizations as partly free. It's even behind some other Middle Eastern countries, such as Kuwait, even Lebanon, I believe. But still, I mean, I've worked in Israel for 5 years. I worked at the Haaretz newspaper before I joined the Post. And really, the major issue here is the military censorship. The press here is pretty much able to print what it likes, but when it touches on matters of military sensitivity, by law, Israeli journalists have to present it to the censor. If the censor censors something that the press thinks is unreasonable, they can appeal the ruling. There's a process for that. And foreign journalists are largely immune. They don't really, I mean, by law they have to present sensitive stories to the censor, but it's almost never done. So what a lot of Israeli press outlets do when they want to cover sensitive information is they'll leak it to foreign media outlets, and then they'll simply quote those foreign media outlets. So there is military censorship here, but it's quite easily circumvented.
Mm-hmm. Yue, tell us a little bit about your own experiences of dealing with the government as an AP reporter working out of the Beijing bureau. I don't think we appreciate so much that there's whenever you cover stories like the Olympics or the earthquake, you really have to interact a great deal with government.
Yes, I during the time I actually made lots of phone calls with local government. That's a big problem in China. Local government basically they rarely interact with the media, and they are more alert against the foreign press. So lots of times you made a phone call and you either been hang up or been told no comment at all. That's a common scenario.
And that was in a good time.
That was in a good time.
That was in a good time. Let's talk a little bit generally about the internet and about. It seems to be the first thing that, at least in the current round of revolutions, that government wants to close down, particularly social media.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true. The government actually in the recent months, actually in January, Chinese President Hu Jintao held a Central Politburo meeting. In the meeting, he gave a speech exactly about we need to regulate internet. That's his message, loud and clear.
Mm. Has some of that been happening in Latin America, Gabriela?
Yes, you see the case of Venezuela in December of last year. They just approved a reform to the telecommunications law, which controls the content of the internet. It punishes the internet, also cable, but internet providers for publishing any information that will be judged against the law. It also information that is of bad taste, information that is out of context, and I'm citing literally the text of the law. So it gives a lot of room for interpretation, and it also bans anonymous messages, which, as you know, is a big problem for social media, comments on web pages, and just the general expression of the readers in web pages, online newspapers, and things like that. And then you also have in Argentina, they have just proposed a new project for a law in Congress this past week, which would control internet as well. They say that it's not very likely to pass, but you see a little bit like that. But in Venezuela, internet content is actually regulated by law, as I'm telling you. That's the worst case. Really,
just showing, by the way, a little clip of Mr. Chavez receiving the Argentine Press Freedom Award this year, which is kind of ironic from what you told us.
Yeah.
Oren, the first thing that's happened in the Middle East, just quickly, is they've tried to turn down social media. Is that as well?
It's true. Syria for years has had restrictions on social media. You can't really access sites like Facebook without a proxy server. But a lot of young people are quite savvy at using these nowadays. Egypt, this week, Egypt sentenced a blogger to 3 years in jail.
Incredible.
The military council that now rules Egypt arrested this a man named Michael Nabil.
I'm gonna have to interrupt you there, Oren, because I regret to say we're running out of time, and we'll probably come back to this issue. These are extreme cases, but journalists and government leaders will never quite agree on each other's rights. In Washington, a little while ago, President Obama accepted a transparency award in a private ceremony from which the press was barred. Thanks to our guests, Wei Ji, Barbara Triomfi, Oren Kessler, and Gabriela Vivanco. Our director is Travis McMillan, audio by Pat Akers. Our lead producer for this show is David Coffin. Rebecca Wilson is executive producer. Our video producer is Tim Wall. Our other producers of Global Journalists are Courtney Flatt, Ryan Kress, and Jessica Popovic. Stephanie Tabor is the production assistant. This is Byron Scott for Global Journalists, reminding you to look at us at globaljournalists.org.